push stick, no glasses, dude. What did I tell you? We are here in the shop. We're going to talk about the table saw today. I'm going to do a couple of tips and tricks about the table saw. But first I'll give you a little bit of a wrap up. What's going on with me? The figure is still on toybacker.com. We're at about 40%, so thank you very much for that. We got about 30 more days to go to get to 100%. I will not make these if we don't reach 100% because that number is the formula by which it pays to make them, the minimum amount, and then I get to take a little bit of that money home. So if we don't reach 100%, unfortunately, this one and the other one will be the only two in existence. So please help out if you can. It goes to a good cause. What else? I have a couple of really kind of big videos, a lot of complications and the way they're made. So those videos are taking some time. The tool dresser is being worked on, and the truck bed video is on its way. And maybe today or tomorrow will be the switchblade video, which is going to appear on Make and also probably my channel. So join me now for some table saw tips.
That's actually good for the.
If you want to put spirals on a dowel, I have this fence here. It's at about a 5 or 6 degree angle to the blade.
6? I'd go 7.
6, 7, whatever. Depends on where you are is where your threads are going to end up. So you want to just wait and watch the whole video before you comment?
Unsubscribe!
Well, I'm sorry. So for those of you that are still here, if you put the dowel onto the blade while it's running and spin it into the blade, it's going to cause a natural spiral. The angle by which this fence right now is magnetized by these two heavy-duty magnets, I could change it and shift it. The angle at which this fence is opposed to the blade will give you the type of spiral you're going to get. Make sense? Let's test it. Here you go. That works by itself sort of naturally. You got to experiment with the right angle you want, the depth of the threads. If I passed it through a second time, I might be able to make it a little bit thicker. Play around with it. But that little trick works on its own. You could put threads in a round dowel quickly. 5 or 7 degree angle, depends on what the troll wants. And then you just kind of naturally twist it through. This has a little bow in it, so I was having a little bit of a hard time twisting it. But there you go. Spirals on a dowel. Sometimes you have thin stock and you're doing something like you're making a lot of furring strips, or you're making a cut repetitive over and over and over again, and you don't want to keep getting near the blade. Here's a little trick. You could cut halfway, flip it, and then cut the other way. I'm going to demonstrate it. I call that the rip then flip. You just got to make sure that you stay with the same side to the fence. Rip and flip. If you're like me, you lost the wrenches to your table saw about 20 years ago. I'm going to show you how I changed the blade. I don't even know how I learned this. It just sort of happened one day. Of course, it's unplugged. I crank it all the way up, and I just find one of my adjustable wrenches, which isn't easy to find in this shop. And then I kind of bottom out the wrench over there, and this just happens naturally. You push the blade backwards, and then it becomes loose. And now I just unhand do the nut on the mandrel. And then when I'm ready to, I just tighten it back in by hand once I've changed the blade. And this time I bottom it out in the front, and by pulling the blade forward, it naturally tightens the nut on the mandrel. So there you go. That's how I do it. Just a quick review.
Put the wrench on it and have it bottom out in the back, and if you just grab the blade, push it backwards, it literally becomes loose. Change your blade, hand tighten it.
And then it starts to work. Maybe it's just my table saw, but that's how I've been doing this for 15 years, 20 years.
Wouldn't fly in my shop.
I know, but we're not in your shop, are we? We're in my shop. Hey, sometimes you want to cut a thin stock. Here I have Formica backed aluminum. This is really thin aluminum. And you need to rip it for whatever reason, and it slides underneath your fence, which of course is extremely dangerous. It puts you in a predicament. This could shoot back at you. A quick solution to that is to make a quick zero clearance, and it raises your fence away from the bottom of the fence. I'll show you. So now, not only do I have a good zero clearance, my stock is not going to slide under my fence. I'll demonstrate. I was able to cut that stock, which is probably less than a 1/16 of an inch thick, and my blade was only up just past the surface of this material, so that's obviously a safe way to handle it. And I know I get a lot of slack for using my pencil all the time, but if you were inclined to try it, the eraser actually gives you that fingertip push that you need for some stock. I also get a lot of slack sometimes for using a knife, but
Flack. Slack would be if they were nice to you and let it go.
okay, flack, slack, whatever you'd like, Mr. Troll. Sometimes when you actually do use a knife, you have that control because the tip of the knife is stuck into your material and it's not going to go back. It's almost like those like one-way tumblers that used to hang down on the crosscut saws that people don't use much anymore. That's basically what this acts like. You push it through and it's not going to kick back on you. I use it on thinner, smaller material. I wouldn't use it on like a giant piece of stock. There you go. Sometimes when you're passing a lot of material through the table saw, or if your blade is a little dull, which, come on, we all cut with a dull blade. I know it's supposed to be sharp. The material will ride up. And so this is a quick solve. I put a screw clamp on my fence just at the height of the material, so I can continuously push material through. It actually provides a little bit of safety too, because it kind of keeps your hand from getting near the blade. And then when you want to get the material through the system, you could use a push stick that goes all the way through.
Yeah, it's gonna rattle right off.
It's not going to rattle off. Right there, I kicked it a little bit, and it's tight, so now the material will kind of have its own little break, and it's also tilted forward, so it kind of wedges in. Simply just use a screw clamp. You don't need to clamp another piece of wood. The screw clamp itself is wood and works just as well. I'll demonstrate.
If you want to cut it up,
I have a lot of them. I buy them at garage sales.
so they mean nothing.
Yeah, they don't. So there you go. There's a quick hold down, and you just use a screw clamp that you more than likely have in your shop. You going?
Yeah, I can see the red light though.
Gap it. I'm going to cut a circle out of this piece of MDF. I made a little jig here, and if you notice, my jig has the handle so that I can keep my body away from the blade. I know people don't think I'm Mr. Safety, but actually I really do worry about cutting my finger off again. So if you can see this jig, I usually use a piece of hardwood, and this is sort of the top of the jig, and this is the piece we're going to be cutting. I have a washer there so that it doesn't loosen or tighten the screw depending upon the direction I turn it. So we're going to cut this, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Again, I'm away from the blade. I'm going to kind of control the piece of wood from away from the blade on this side, and the push-pull is going to be controlled here by this long stick which sticks out from the saw. So that's how you make 42 door stops in one circle. So that's a perfect circle. Depending upon how far away from the blade I set my screw, if I had more material I could be out here, of course I would have a bigger circle. So that's the radius, twice the radius is the diameter. And so that's how you do it. You stay safely away from the blade and you make a circle. I also had this screw a little bit tight so that it wouldn't run away on me, because this of course could spin it if you're not careful. So the tighter that is creates a little friction, and then you're safe.
Ready.
Whoa! No push stick, no glasses. What's up, dude? Take two. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I see on YouTube a lot, which makes me cringe. I know a lot of people see the things I do and it makes them cringe, but this is extremely dangerous, and maybe it's people that just don't have enough experience, or maybe have never been bit by the tiger, literally, the table saw. People sometimes use this as a sort of a cross cut, cutting between the fence and the blade something wider than it is longer. For instance, I've seen somebody use a 2x4. They use a 2x4 like this. It's dangerous because that small piece will bind, and then when you get a binding, that's when you get a kickback. And when you get a kickback, anything could happen. Your hand could pass through the blade like it happened to me. I'll explain that in a minute. But don't ever cut anything shorter than it is wider. That's how you get a kickback. That's how you get binding between the fence and the blade. Whenever you get binding between the fence and the blade, you'll have a problem. So don't do that. Use a crosscut sled or a chop saw. That's the proper tool. Sometimes I see people struggle with a whole sheet when they just need to rip off a piece of 2-inch or 4-inch or 3-inch stock. This is where we keep the stock. It comes down the stairs and it mostly stays here. So sometimes what I do is I will rip off more than I need, typically a half a sheet. So what I'll do is I'll give myself a mark. There's half, and then I just literally just do a rough cut. I'll take my circ saw right here and I'll just rough cut a half a sheet. And so now I have a much more manageable piece to bring through the basement, to bring into the shop, to pass through the table saw. I'm not wrestling with a full 4-inch piece of stock simply to get a 3-inch rip. So if you have a lot of stock and you could sacrifice making a full piece in half, it's a safer, more manageable piece to cut on the table saw. Thanks. Spike, let's go. We're going to do a tips video using the table saw. That means you have to get out. I'm going to show you how to make a piece of wood into a spring. Maybe you want to curve a piece of wood around something, then you can go back and fill it, or if you want to curve it and then wrap it with a veneer, check this trick out. I discovered this when I was a kid playing on my radial arm saw. I have the fence set at a slight angle. Maybe it's 5 or 7 degrees. I don't know. Maybe the troll knows.
It's gonna crack.
Well, try it for yourself. It doesn't always crack. I'm going to put a series of cuts, and then I'm going to flip it over, and at the same angle, do a series of cuts. And the cuts are going to cross each other.
That's the sound of it breaking.
It's not going to break.
No plywood?
It's not gonna, plywood is a bad choice. It's like, you don't know what you're talking about. You never did it.
I read about it.
Of course.
I read about it.
You read about everything, but you never do anything.
All
right, well, go away.
Yeah.
So I've cut through and I'm about 1/8 of an inch from the other side. I'm going to move over about 1/4 of an inch and I'm going to give myself a little mark. It's important that your intervals are regular. If they're not regular, the wood will bend unevenly and be susceptible to cracking. All right? So here we go. And now I'm going to turn it over and do those same series of cuts. I'm going to use the cuts I previously made to give me my regulation going on the other side. This wood is very brittle, so this might break, but let's take a look. I'm able to make this wood directly into a spring. It hasn't broke yet. If I bend it more, it'll probably break. But there you go. I can probably, it's almost at a 90-degree turn, and nothing is broke yet. If you use something with a little less dry, a little less brittle, you get a really nice turn. If you get thinner kerfs, shallower cuts, closer together, you get different types of results, but you will always get a spring. And that's how you make a wooden spring to make a nice, beautiful curve. This piece of wood is like rubber now. If you had to go around a baseboard, for instance, you could do this and then wrap it with veneer.
Why don't you buy a wiggle board?
Well, because it's nice to say that you've made something yourself. Don't you think? Did you ever make anything for yourself?
A duty.
Yeah, probably. Okay, I'm going to talk for a second about this sled. I don't know if this is an original design, but I made it a long time ago. And it has two positions. It's a little beat up now. I got to make a more updated version of it. But I have my straight cut, and if I flip it around, I have my bevel cut. So the way that works is I turn it over and I move this strip to here. I could even just get crazy and leave the strip out altogether, and then the saw works one way, I flip it 180 and it works the other way. Let me demonstrate. So here I am with my straight cuts, and I'm not going to bevel the blade because I don't have the right insert in there. And then there, now I turn it around 180 and I have my bevel crosscut sled. So that's something you guys could refine. Maybe somebody could make a good video on redoing that. Sometimes you have a board that is a live edge, and this represents a live edge. This is really just a bandsaw cut for the demonstration. And this is also a live edge. How do you edge it with a table saw? This is what I've been doing for many years, and it actually works out really good for me. I'll take a board or a piece of plywood, or maybe even just a piece of MDF, or even just a 1/4 inch sheet of Luan, and I set the space to that piece of wood. And then if I have the space on my board, I can put screws directly into it if I have some cutoff I know is going to become scrap. Or I could put some hold down clamps here and here. So in this case, I'm just going to put some screws directly into the board.
Fell.
So now, the reason I make the board the same width as the blade is to the fence, so I could see what's going to become my cutoff. Right there I could see, I know that that's going to get cut completely off. So let's try it. You guys smell that? Boy, that smells good. Wow, that smells good. So now I have a reference to do another cut. So if this board was 8 or 9 feet long, I would do the same thing. I would just get another piece of 8-foot scrap that references the fence all the way down. So there. That's how you clean up a live edge board. Now I could actually put this through the table saw and end up with another piece of wood there.
So I'm going to flip this upside down inside there, and then you can flip it back upside down so the light's buried.
Not just sticking in any.
Oh, there's one back there anyway.
Sometimes I like to resaw on the table saw. A lot of people say, why don't you just do it on the bandsaw? More than likely it's because I don't have a sharp enough blade. And then I also like to avoid drift. When you're cutting on the bandsaw, you get drift and you always end up with something. If I resaw on the table saw, if I don't need anything bigger than 6 inches, I can do it here and I end up with a pretty regular cut. I'm going to demonstrate how I do it. A lot of times I don't have a good rip blade with me, and then even just 3 inches altogether is a little too much to take at one time. So I'm going to do it in bits and pieces, and I'm going to show you. First, I'm going to cut this piece of wood to 6 inches so I know I have enough room. So there. Let me do that. Now I want to split this piece of wood in half, and I want to find the center. So I eyeball it, and then and now I cut it this way and this way, which means I cut both sides, so I'm pretty close to the center. I'm going to go with it, because if I am going to resaw wood like this, more than likely I'm going to throw it through the plane anyway. So I have my blade set at about 1 inch, so I'm going to cut both sides, and then I'm going to raise the blade a little bit and cut both sides, and raise the blade a little bit and cut both sides. That's the safer way to do it. I can try and take one big bite. I don't obviously have a rip blade on here right now, and it just puts a lot of stress on the saw anyway, so go without. So there you go. That's how I resaw a piece of wood that's 6 inches. I could then throw these through the planer, the surface planer, and of course I end up with a nice clean surface. This is pretty pine that I got from a sawmill. It smells really good. It smells nice. Spike, I told you to oil your hands. All right, this is my box joint or finger joint jig. I didn't invent it. I just made my own version of something I found on YouTube. This happens to be the simplest way to make box joints, in my opinion. There's lots of complicated ones out there. I need to see things simple. I need to have things simple. Otherwise, it's just hard for me. I lose interest. So I'm going to demonstrate this. You have the width of the blade, the space, which is the same width of the blade, and then a spacer, which is the same width of the blade. And let's try it and see how it works.
Red blades suck.
What's the matter now?
Red blades suck.
This is a, what is that blade? What is it, a Tornado or Feud? What is the name of that blade?
Diablo.
It's a Diablo from Home Depot. It's actually not bad. You know, they all go dull when you cut nails with them.
He forgot to pay this day about it.
I'm not done yet. Nice, beautiful finger joints, the width of the blade. Sometimes I need a zero clearance plate and I don't either have one or I don't have the time to make one. This is a zero clearance plate, but it's a little beat up at this point. I could put a new insert in there, which I have, but I always save them for a very special occasion, which never seems to come. I always do this instead. I take a piece of MDF and I just take some blue tape. I make a couple of, this should have been in the tape tips video. I make a couple of little flip around double-sided tape loops.
Tape waster.
Well, I get it for free because this is sponsored by, you know, that big name.
Guess it doesn't matter.
Sometimes it doesn't,
Okay.
Mr. Troll. What do you do for a living, Mr. Troll?
You're the one that wanted to be in the spotlight in front of everybody.
So you don't have a job.
Are you happy with your long distance?
Oh, I see. This is an advertisement. So now that I tape down my board, I can then raise my blade through it and I have a perfect zero clearance. Ready? Here is a piece of veneered plywood, which more than likely will definitely get some tear out. And there we have a pretty good cut with no tear out.
Why don't you just buy it?
Well, because making things for yourself sometimes is just a little bit more satisfying, don't you think?
Amazon, $2. 2 days, a drone will drop it off.
I just made it though out of scrap. I'm done.
2 hours. It's here. You're done. That's satisfying,
But it's done. It's already done.
I guess.
Okay, I'm going to talk for just 2 seconds about the table saw stand. It took me 25 years to figure out. This is just angle iron. You may have seen David Welder fabricate this on his channel. David Welder's got his own YouTube channel. You got to check it out. This was on chunks of wood, and the chunks of wood would always skid around, and the table never stayed in the right place. So it just occurred to me, let's make a little stand for it with just this angle iron, and then we have these leveling bolts. The bolts are welded to the frame, and then you just can tighten them from the top, and they don't move.
The nuts welded to the frame. The bolt moves.
Are you trolling me again?
That's serious.
I'm just saying.
Okay, the nuts are welded to the frame and the bolts go through the nuts. And then there's an extra nut on top, you can tighten it. Here you go. If you want to improvise a cool stand, if you have an unlevel floor like we have here, this was the simplest thing for us to come up with. It actually is, has been a great improvement because now the saw doesn't slide around. Table saw stand cam.
Weird though, just one stationary one.
I'm not mad at you.
I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. About 5 years ago, I cut my pinky off on this table saw. At the time the accident happened, I'd owned this table saw for about 23 years. And I just never thought that it could happen to me because I was just so confident. And obviously, that put me in a predicament, having a certain sense of confidence. I was adjusting the saw blade up I was turning the saw blade up when the saw blade caught the piece of wood. I was adjusting it to a line that I had here, and the blade was running with my first mistake. And the blade caught the wood and it ran through the saw, and it blasted me in the arm right here, which caused a huge welt, and it popped a blood vessel right here. When the incident happened, this all happened in a split second, like a fraction of a second. It blasted my arm, the wood flew away. I looked at my forearm, there was blood squirting out of a small artery right here. And then I looked at my hand, and my hand had run over the blade like this, and my pinky was hanging in a really bizarre direction, and I knew I had a serious problem. I grabbed my hand like this. Now in an instant, I'm holding my pinky in place, cut through the bone, and blood is squirting out of my forearm. So I had 2 injuries on both arms in a matter of a fraction of a second. And I basically blame it on being A, overconfident, and B, just working within a time frame. I had 5 minutes. I thought I could get what I needed done. I had my mind on what I had to do next. I wasn't present, and I wasn't being safe. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount that day. It cost me a lot of money to have my finger reattached. It cost about $15,000, and obviously a lot of pain. And now my pinky doesn't work very well, and it's about a centimeter shorter.
Show us.
The saw cut went through this joint on my finger, it went through this bone right here, and then down the side of my hand. So if you look inside the palm of my hand, I have a cut going down the whole side of my hand. The blade was only about 3/8 of an inch high, or about a ½ inch high when it occurred, and my hand ran across the blade like that. So everything went wrong in an instant, and that's typically how accidents happen. So it's really important to learn from my mistakes and just always be present. Be completely aware of what you're doing. If you have other things on your mind, stop for a minute. Whenever you're making an adjustment, turn the table saw off, which is a mistake I didn't make, of course, which was the biggest mistake. I'm adjusting the size and the blade and everything while the saw is running. So learn from my mistakes and just be present. Turn the saw off between adjustments. And you know, a lot of people have the saw stop. I obviously don't have one, and I'm not being paid by them, but it's obviously a very safe piece of equipment. And I know a lot of people have them. And actually, because of my injury, a lot of my friends got saw stops. I obviously haven't gotten one yet. I already paid $15,000. Does lightning strike twice? Probably in my shop. But just be safe and be present. That's really the most important thing. So that's just a few table saw tips. Of course, we all have our own methods of work. Maybe you have some good ideas. You could share them in the comments. To take a good look at some really interesting table saw techniques, take a look at Izzy Swan. Izzy does some really cool table saw stuff. And take a look at David Welder's channel. David is the producer and the troll today. David, say hello.
Is it on?
Is it on? It's on.
Is it blinking?
It's blinking. So take a look at David, take a look at Izzy, and thank you all very much. And this is Spike. Peace. Spike, you did good on the table saw today.
All 4 paws.
Don't forget to use the push sticks.
Don't forget to use your push sticks. Don't be like Spike. Right? I had like 5 minutes and I thought I could cut this piece of wood. And then all of a sudden I'm in the hospital for like 3 days getting my finger sewn back on. Are you listening to me?